My son's wife called me a useful tenant and threw me out like garbage. But as I sat among my scattered belongings, I found an envelope in my dead wife's handwriting. For Amos, open only if they kick you out. She'd been gone 6 years. How did she know one phone call later their nightmare began? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My pickup truck coughed to a stop in front of what I'd called home for 8 years. The engine's familiar wheeze echoed off the quiet suburban street in Meridian, Idaho, where manicured lawns stretched between two-story homes, like green carpets of middle-class respectability. Streetlights were beginning to flicker on in the late spring afternoon, casting long shadows that should have felt welcoming. Instead, something felt wrong. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the pile. There, scattered beside the dumpster like yesterday's garbage, was a mountain of belongings that made my chest tighten with recognition. Cardboard boxes, torn open contents, spilling onto the pavement, in a chaos that my 67-year-old mind couldn't quite process. My hands stayed gripped on the steering wheel knuckles, white against the worn leather, as the impossible reality sank in. Those were my things. I climbed out slowly, my joints protesting after 4 days of fishing at Payette Lake. The cool May air carried the threat of rain and something else, the musty odor of clothes that had been sitting outside too long. My work boots crunched on gravel as I approached the pile, each step feeling heavier than the last. There, half buried under a tangle of winter coats, was our wedding picture from 42 years ago. The glass was cracked diagonally across Eleanor's face, her gentle smile split by a jagged line. Dirt clung to the silver foam I'd polished just last month, back when this house still felt like home. Someone made a mistake, I whispered to the empty street. This has to be a mistake. But the evidence kept mounting. My anniversary watch, the one Eleanor had saved 3 months to buy me back in '98, lay face down in a puddle, its crystal shattered. The leather band was soaked through, probably ruined. I picked it up with shaking fingers, water dripping between my knuckles like tears I couldn't shed. My backup fishing gear was scattered everywhere. The tackle box I kept in the garage split open with lures and sinkers, mixing with kitchen utensils and old photographs. The rod I'd planned to give my grandson someday lay snapped in half, its guides, torn away like broken promises. Someone had thrown my entire life onto the street with all the care they'd give to actual trash. The boxes told their own story, hastily packed, roughly handled, torn at the corners where they'd been dragged or dropped. My name was still visible on one side, written in Derek's careful handwriting from our last move. The ink had run in the damp air, making my own name look like a watercolor mistake. That's when I found it, tucked between my old work shirts, an envelope that didn't belong with the rest. Clean, unmarked by the weather, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. In Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, words that made my blood run cold. For Amos, open only if they kick you out. My dead wife's handwriting. On an envelope that shouldn't exist. The key slid into the front door lock, turned halfway, then stopped dead. I tried again, applying more pressure, wiggling the metal back and forth like I'd done 1,000 times before. Nothing. The lock refused to budge, solid and unyielding, as if I'd been trying to open a bank vault with a butter knife. They'd changed the locks on my own house. A curtain twitched in Randy Hayes' window across the street. My neighbor of 12 years, the man who'd borrowed my tools and shared beers on summer evenings, watching me like I was some kind of curiosity. I walked toward his house, the envelope clutched in my trembling hand. "Randy," I called when he opened his door, just wide enough for his weathered face to appear. "Do you know what happened here? All my stuff is on the street." His eyes darted past me toward the scattered belongings, then back to my face with an expression I'd never seen before. Uncomfortable, evasive, almost guilty. "Sorry, Amos, I haven't noticed anything unusual. Maybe some kind of mistake." The lie hung between us like smoke. Randy had been retired for 6 years and spent most days positioned at his front window, watching the neighborhood like as a security guard. He knew exactly what had happened, but he wasn't going to tell me. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me standing alone with Eleanor's impossible message. How had she known this would happen? Headlights swept across the scattered remains of my life as the Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. I stood up from the lawn chair I'd salvaged from the pile, Eleanor's envelope still clutched in my hand, like a lifeline. Relief flooded through me despite everything. Finally, someone who could explain this nightmare. Derek got out of the passenger side, his movements careful and deliberate. At 44, my son looked older than his years, shoulders slumped under the weight of something I couldn't identify. But it was the third person emerging from the back seat that made my stomach clench with unease. A stranger in an expensive suit, his smile too practiced, too smooth. "Derek, thank God, you're here," I called, walking toward them. "What happened?" "Why are my things on the street? I can't get into the house." Derek couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, hands shoved deep in his pockets, like a guilty child caught in a lie. Brittany emerged from the driver's side with her usual brisk efficiency, her blonde hair perfect, despite the long day, her expression cold enough to freeze water. "Because you're no longer needed here, Amos," she said, walking past me like I was invisible. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, not needed? This is my home. I live here." "Lived," she corrected, pulling grocery bags from the trunk with sharp, angry movements. "Past tense. Your job here is done. Take your junk and get out." The stranger stepped forward, extending a manicured hand that I didn't take. "Theodore Blackwood," he said smoothly. "Call me Theo. I'm a mortgage consultant working with Derek and Brittany on their housing situation." Housing situation. I looked between them, desperate for sanity in this madness. "Derek, what is he talking about? Tell me what's going on here." My son finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was nothing. Complete empty indifference, like I was already dead to him. "Sorry, Dad," he mumbled, barely audible. "We tried to make it work, but what?" I reached toward him, and he actually flinched away from my touch. "Derek, look at me. I'm your father. I've lived in this house for 8 years. I pay for the groceries, the utilities, the repairs. This is my home." Brittany laughed a sound like breaking ceramic. "Your home. You were a tenant, Amos, a very useful tenant who paid all our bills and asked for nothing in return. But tenants can be evicted when they're no longer convenient." The cruelty of it stole my breath. I looked between them. My son avoiding my gaze, my daughter-in-law smiling with obvious satisfaction, this stranger, watching our family disintegrate with professional interest. "I helped you buy this house," I said slowly, each word carefully measured. "When you couldn't qualify for the mortgage, I co-signed. When you couldn't make the payments, I covered them. When you needed money for Derek's car, I gave you my savings. Everything I had, I gave to this family." "And we're grateful," Brittany said with mock sincerity. "Really we are. But gratitude doesn't mean we have to house you forever. You're old Amos. You take up space. You track mud through my clean house. You leave dishes in the sink and watch television too loud. We want our lives back." Theo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Mr. Whitfield, let me be clear. You have 24 hours to disappear. We have ways to make elderly people relocate permanently. Accidents happen, especially to stubborn old men who don't know when they're not wanted." The threat hung in the air like poison. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was something darker, more dangerous. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out smaller than I intended, tinged with a vulnerability that made me hate myself. "That's not our problem anymore," Brittany said, heading toward the front door with her groceries. "You're a grown man. Figure it out." I turned to Derek one last time, putting every ounce of paternal authority into his name. "Derek, look at me, son." He raised his eyes for just a moment, and I saw something flicker there. Guilt, maybe even love, but it was quickly smothered by fear and weakness. "The locks are changed," Brittany called over her shoulder. "Don't try to get in. I'll call the police if I have to." The front door opened and closed, leaving me alone under the streetlight with my scattered possessions and Eleanor's mysterious letter. The porch light came on, then immediately went off again, a clear message that I wasn't welcome even near the entrance. Theo lingered by his car, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness. 24 hours, old man. Don't make this harder than it has to be." As his car disappeared into the night, I stood there processing what had just happened. 44 years of fatherhood erased, 8 years of generosity forgotten, a lifetime of love and sacrifice dismissed like an inconvenient bill. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing, something harder and colder than the evening air. They thought they could use me up and throw me away like garbage. They thought they could steal everything I'd worked for and then lock me out of my own life. Eleanor's letter felt warm in my trembling hand. Somehow, impossibly, my dead wife had seen this coming. Time to find out what she wanted me to know. I sat in the Budget Inn parking lot at 7 in the morning, Eleanor's letter spread open on my steering wheel, reading her words for the third time. Her handwriting was as familiar as my own heartbeat, but the message felt impossible. "My dearest Amos, if you're reading this, they've done exactly what I feared they would. Don't despair. I've prepared for this day. Go to Harrison Caldwell, 412 Main Street, Suite 304. Tell him Eleanor sent you. He has everything you need. Trust me, one last time. All my love, Eleanor. P.S. Check the savings account I opened in 2019. You're going to be just fine. Harrison Caldwell. I'd never heard the name, but Eleanor had written it with the confidence of someone who'd planned every detail. At 9 sharp, I stood outside a downtown Boise office building clutching a manila folder containing Eleanor's letter and every document I could salvage from the debris of my life. The elevator carried me to the 3rd floor, where frosted glass doors announced Caldwell and Associates Property Law. Inside certificates lined the walls between floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes that spoke of serious business and real expertise. Mr. Whitfield. The receptionist's voice was kind but professional. Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Harrison Caldwell rose from behind a mahogany desk that had probably cost more than my pickup truck. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 52, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen every variation of human crisis. Please sit down, he said, gesturing to a leather chair. You mentioned Eleanor sent you. I handed him the letter with shaking fingers. His expression changed the moment he saw the handwriting, a mixture of recognition and something deeper. Respect, maybe even affection. Eleanor Whitfield, he said softly. I was so sorry to hear about her passing. She was remarkable. You knew my wife? She came to me 4 years ago, about 6 months after her cancer diagnosis. She said, Harrison, I need to protect Amos from people who might take advantage of his generosity. I won't be around to do it myself. He looked up from the letter. She was very specific about what might happen. My chest tightened. She knew Derek would do this. She knew Derek was weak, and she was concerned about his wife's influence. Eleanor was a very perceptive woman. He opened the folder I had brought, spreading documents across his desk, with practiced efficiency. Let me review these property documents. For the next 30 minutes, Harrison examined every paper with the methodical attention I recognized from my own work habits. Mortgage agreements, property tax records, insurance policies. Everything I'd managed to rescue from the street. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Mr. Whitfield, I need to tell you something very important. He turned the deed toward me, pointing to specific sections. According to these documents, you are the sole owner of the property in question. Your son and daughter-in-law have no legal claim whatsoever. The words hit me like electricity. What do you mean? The mortgage was issued in your name only. You qualified for the loan, you've made all the payments, and the property tax records show you as the official owner. The deed is clear. Amos Whitfield, sole proprietor. I stared at the papers, trying to process what he was telling me. But Derek and Brittany live there. They've been treating it like their house for 8 years. Living in a property doesn't establish ownership. At best, they could be considered tenants, though I don't see any formal lease agreement. Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. Legally, you have every right to reclaim your property and evict any unauthorized occupants. The room seemed to tilt around me. 8 years of being treated like a burden. 8 years of having my generosity thrown back at me. 8 years of watching my son choose his wife over his father. And all along, they'd been living in my house, eating food I bought, using utilities I paid for in a home they had no legal right to occupy. Eleanor knew this. She orchestrated it. When Derek couldn't qualify for the mortgage on his own, she insisted the loan be structured this way. She told me, if something happens to me, Amos will need protection. This house might be the only security he has. Harrison pulled out another folder, this one thick with bank statements and investment records. There's more. Eleanor opened a savings account in 2019, funded with her life insurance payout, and some very careful stock investments. The current balance is just over $150,000. My hands were shaking now. $150,000. She wanted you to have resources if Derek ever disappointed you. Her words. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Mr. Whitfield, you're not a homeless old man dependent on ungrateful relatives. You're a property owner with substantial savings and full legal rights. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Theo's threats, Brittany's cruelty, Derek's cowardice. I thought about my belongings scattered in the street, like garbage about sleeping in a motel while strangers occupied my own home. What are my options? You could demand they vacate immediately. You could begin formal eviction proceedings. You could sell the property and force them to relocate. Harrison's smile was slight but significant. As the legal owner, you have considerable leverage in this situation. I looked at Eleanor's letter again, her careful handwriting spelling out love that transcended death itself. She'd seen this coming and prepared for it, protecting me even when she couldn't be there to do it herself. How long would an eviction take? In Idaho, with proper documentation 6 to 8 weeks for an unlawful detainer lawsuit, less if they don't contest it. He gathered the papers efficiently. I can begin proceedings immediately if that's what you want. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something other than despair. Eleanor had given me more than legal protection. She'd given me the power to choose my own future. Let's do it. The next morning I sat in my pickup truck outside Walsh Realty Harrison's business card in one hand and a list of Eleanor's instructions in the other. She'd thought of everything, even recommending a specific realtor for when the time comes to make strategic moves. Victoria Sterling's name was written in Eleanor's careful script, along with a note. She'll understand the situation better than most. The office was modern and professional, with awards lining the walls, and property listings displayed on flat-screen monitors. Victoria Sterling rose from behind a glass desk as I entered, a woman in her mid-40s with auburn hair and the kind of confident handshake that spoke of success in a competitive business. "Mr. Whitfield, please have a seat. You mentioned on the phone that you're considering selling your property. It's complicated." I began settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. I own a house in Meridian, but there are family issues. People living there who need to be relocated. Victoria's expression remained professionally neutral as I explained the basics. The eviction, the legal consultation, the need for strategic pressure. But when I mentioned Eleanor's name, something shifted in her demeanor. "Eleanor Whitfield was your wife. You knew her." Victoria's professional mask slipped entirely, replaced by something warmer and more personal. "Mr. Whitfield, Amos, Eleanor was my aunt, my mother's sister." The words hit me like electricity. "Your aunt. She called me 3 years ago, right after her diagnosis got worse. She said, 'Victoria, if anything happens to me, Amos might need family. He doesn't know he has. Watch for him. Help him if he needs it.'" Victoria's voice grew soft with memory. She was very specific about what might happen with Derek and his wife. I stared at this woman who'd been a stranger 5 minutes ago and was now revealed as family. Eleanor's family, which made her mine by extension. "She planned for you to help me. Aunt Eleanor was the most thoughtful person I ever knew. She loved you completely, Amos, and she worried about what would happen when she wasn't there to protect you." Victoria pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. "She even gave me copies of all your property documents just in case." For the next hour, we discussed strategy with the efficiency of people who understood each other perfectly. Victoria explained how a strategic property listing could create pressure on Derek and Brittany, forcing them to confront the reality of their situation. She knew the market knew which buyers would be most motivated, knew how to time everything for maximum impact. "There's someone else you should meet," Victoria said as we prepared to leave. "Eleanor mentioned him too, Clayton Morse. He's been keeping an eye on certain people who might cause you trouble." The drive to Payette Lake took 30 minutes through Idaho countryside that was finally showing signs of real spring. Victoria followed in her sedan as my pickup navigated the winding road to the fishing spot where I'd found peace just days ago, before my world turned upside down. Clayton Morris was waiting by the water's edge exactly where Eleanor had said he'd be. He looked like every retired cop I'd ever met. Observant eyes, careful posture, the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of dealing with people at their worst and best. "Amos," he said, extending a firm handshake. "Eleanor told me a lot about you. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry about what's happening now. You knew my wife. We met at the cancer support group. Eleanor was something special. Sharp as a tack, even when the treatments were rough." Clayton's expression grew serious. "She asked me to keep an eye on a few people, including Theodore Blackwood." My blood chilled. "You know about Theo. I've been tracking mortgage fraud schemes for the past 6 months. Your family walked into a trap, Amos. Theo's done this before. Targets elderly property owners, manipulates family members, forces people out of homes they legally own." Clayton pulled out a tablet showing me photographs and documents. "You're not his first victim, but if we play this right, you might be his last." We spent the next 2 hours by the lake developing what Victoria dubbed Operation Homecoming. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: legal pressure through Harrison's eviction proceedings, financial pressure through Victoria's strategic property listing, and investigative pressure through Clayton's evidence gathering on Theo's fraud activities. Eleanor set up a network, I realized, looking between these two people who'd become allies in a single afternoon. She knew exactly what I'd need and made sure it would be available. "Your wife loved you enough to protect you even after she was gone," Victoria said. She saw Derek's weakness, Brittany's greed, and the kind of predators who circle families in crisis. So she built you a safety net. Clayton nodded toward the lake, where the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the water. Eleanor said you'd need more than legal documents. You'd need people who understood loyalty, who wouldn't abandon you when things got difficult. He smiled slightly. She was right, as usual. As we prepared to leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the strength that comes from not facing problems alone. Eleanor had given me more than legal protection and financial resources. She'd given me family I didn't know existed and allies who understood the fight ahead. "So what's our next move?" I asked. Victoria and Clayton exchanged a look that spoke of shared understanding and serious purpose. "We show them what happens when they mess with the wrong family," Victoria said. "The war for my home was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I wasn't fighting it alone." Clayton's home office looked like something from a police procedural. Wall-mounted whiteboards covered with photographs, timelines and connecting strings that mapped out patterns I was only beginning to understand. On Friday morning, day 5, of what Victoria had dubbed Operation Homecoming, I sat across from evidence that made my blood run cold. 12 families, Clayton said, tapping a map of the Boise area, dotted with red pins. All elderly property owners, all targeted by Theodore Blackwood over the past 3 years. Same pattern every time. Identify vulnerable seniors, manipulate family members, force evictions, then flip the properties for massive profits. I studied the photographs of houses I recognized from my own neighborhood and beyond. Modest homes, well-maintained, the kind that represented a lifetime of work and careful saving. What happened to the families? 3 moved in with relatives who could barely afford to help. 2 ended up in assisted living facilities they couldn't afford. One couple, Clayton's voice grew quiet, Harold and Marge Peterson, married 62 years. Harold had a heart attack 2 weeks after they were forced out of their home. Marge is in a nursing home now, paying for it with the proceeds from selling her wedding ring. The weight of it settled over me like lead. This wasn't just about my family anymore. Theo was a predator, and Derek and Brittany had made themselves his accomplices. "We're going to stop him," I said, and meant it completely. Victoria arrived at noon with a briefcase full of documents and the focused energy of someone who'd spent the morning making things happen. "The property listing is ready," she announced, spreading papers across Clayton's desk. "Professional photography is scheduled for Monday, and I've already identified 3 serious buyers who can close quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. 30 days if they're motivated. And trust me, in this market, they will be." Her smile was sharp with anticipation. "Derek and Brittany are about to discover what it feels like when their comfortable assumptions get challenged." Saturday morning found us at the Ada County Courthouse, where Harrison Caldwell met us with the formal legal documents that would change everything. The unlawful detainer lawsuit was 12 pages of precise legal language that boiled down to a simple message. Amos Whitfield owned the property Derek and Brittany were trespassing, and they had 30 days to vacate or face forcible removal. "This is it," Harrison said as we filed the paperwork with the court clerk. "Once this is served, there's no going back. They'll know exactly what they're facing." I thought about Harold Peterson's heart attack, about Marge selling her wedding ring, about all the families Theo had destroyed with Derek and Brittany's eager cooperation. Good. It's time, they understood, consequences. That evening, I drove to Randy Hayes' house for a conversation that was 3 days overdue. My neighbor answered the door with the guilty expression of someone who'd been avoiding an uncomfortable truth. "Randy, we need to talk." He led me to his kitchen, where we'd shared countless cups of coffee over the years. Tonight, the familiar space felt different, charged with the tension of secrets finally coming to light. "I know you saw what happened Wednesday night," I said without preamble. "I know you heard Theo's threats, and I know you've been feeling guilty about it ever since." Randy's weathered hands shook as he poured coffee he didn't seem to want. "Amos, I should have done something. Should have called the police, or you can do something now. Clayton Morse is building a case against Theo Blackwood. Your testimony about what you witnessed could help protect other families from going through what I did." "I kept thinking about your mother." "Amos," Randy said suddenly, "Eleanor would be ashamed of what's happening here. She loved that boy like her own son, and to see him treat you like that." He shook his head. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I saw." Sunday morning brought the first sign that our pressure was working. Clayton called at 7 a.m. with news that sent electricity through my veins. "Theo knows about the lawsuit," he reported. "My sources say he spent yesterday making phone calls, trying to find out who's behind the legal action. He's rattled Amos, and rattled people make mistakes." By Sunday evening, those mistakes were becoming visible. Derek called my cell phone for the first time since the confrontation, his voice tight with something that might have been panic. Dad, we need to talk. There are things happening that I don't understand. Theo's saying things about legal problems, about investigations. What's going on? I let the silence stretch between us, remembering his weak apology, his refusal to defend me, his choice to stand by while his wife and her accomplice destroyed our family. Derek, 3 days ago, you told me I wasn't needed anymore. You watched Theo threaten me with violence and said nothing. Now you want to talk. Dad, please, I think I made a mistake. The admission hung between us like smoke. After 44 years of fatherhood, my son was finally beginning to understand what he'd done. But understanding wasn't the same as making amends, and making amends wasn't the same as earning forgiveness. The time for talking was Wednesday night, I said quietly. Now it's time for consequences. I hung up the phone and looked out at the Meridian neighborhood where I'd lived for 8 years, where I'd been a good neighbor and a generous father, and a man who'd believed that family loyalty was unconditional. Theo Blackwood was about to learn that some families fight back, and Derek was about to discover that some choices can't be undone with a phone call and a weak apology. The legal papers would be served tomorrow. The real battle was just beginning. The legal papers were served on Monday morning, Day 10th, with the clinical efficiency that only comes from years of court procedure. I wasn't there to see Derek and Brittany's faces when the sheriff's deputy handed them the unlawful detainer lawsuit, but I was at the courthouse steps 2 hours later when Theodore Blackwood found me. You made a mistake, old man, he said, his voice low and dangerous as he approached where I stood with Harrison. Gone was the smooth mortgage broker facade. This was something uglier, more desperate. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Harrison stepped forward, his legal training evident in the way he positioned himself between threat and client. Mr. Blackwood, any communication regarding this case should go through proper legal channels. Theo ignored him completely, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Some people have accidents, Amos. Elderly people, especially. They fall downstairs. They forget to turn off gas stoves. They get confused driving at night and end up in ditches. Are you threatening my client? Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with bullies in expensive suits before. I'm sharing statistical information about the risks of advanced age. Theo's smile was sharp as broken glass. Amos understands what I mean, don't you? He walked away before I could respond, but the message was clear. This had moved beyond family drama and legal maneuvering. Theo was willing to hurt me to protect whatever scheme he'd built around my property. Tuesday brought news that changed everything. Derek called, his voice shaking with something I hadn't heard since he was a child, afraid of monsters under his bed. Dad, I found something. Mom left another letter, in the basement safe behind her jewelry box. She knew about Brittany. She knew about all of it. Eleanor's second letter was shorter than the first, but its impact was devastating. Derek read it to me over the phone, his voice breaking with each word. Son, if you're reading this, you've betrayed your father. I pray you haven't, but I know the pressure you'll face. Brittany doesn't love you the way I loved your father. She loves what you can provide. Choose wisely what you do next. Your father deserves better than this. You were raised to be better than this. Mom. The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm 44 years in the making. She knew, Derek whispered. Mom knew what Brittany was, and she tried to warn me. Eleanor saw things clearly, I said carefully. She always did. Wednesday's revelation came from Derek again, this time in a call that arrived at midnight. He was crying. Actually crying, in a way I hadn't heard since his mother's funeral. Dad, Brittany. She's been sleeping with Theo for months, maybe longer. She told me tonight, said we're in this together now, and I have to choose between you and our future. His voice cracked completely. She said, if I don't stand with them, they'll make sure I lose everything. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Brittany hadn't just been greedy or entitled. She'd been actively working with Theo, using Derek as a pawn in whatever game they'd been playing with my property and my life. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. God help me, Dad. I don't know. Thursday brought Theo's most direct threat yet. I was leaving my apartment complex when 2 men in expensive suits approached my truck. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't make conversation. One simply handed me a photograph. My pickup truck in the apartment parking lot, taken with a telephoto lens that captured my license plate, clearly. Nice truck, the second man said conversationally. Be a shame if something happened to it, or to the old guy who drives it. They walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the parking lot with photographic evidence that they'd been watching me, following me, documenting my movements with the precision of professionals. I called Clayton immediately. They're escalating, he confirmed grimly. My sources say Theo's brought in outside help. People who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. What kind of problems? The kind that ask too many questions about mortgage fraud and property theft? That evening, Derek appeared at my apartment door. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Hollow-eyed, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday. Behind him, barely visible in the parking lot, shadows sat Brittany in their Honda Civic. Dad, she's in the car. She wants to talk to you. Wants to work something out. Derek's hands were shaking. She says if we can all just sit down and discuss this like adults. I looked past him to the car, where my daughter-in-law waited, probably rehearsing whatever manipulation she'd prepared for this moment. The woman who'd called me a useful tenant. The woman who'd been sleeping with the man who'd threatened my life. Derek, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I met his eyes directly. Do you believe your mother would want you to choose Brittany over your father? His face crumpled like paper in a fire. No. God, no, she wouldn't. Then you know what you have to do. Derek looked back at the car, then at me, then at his hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 44 years of fatherhood came down to this moment. My son standing at a crossroads between the family that raised him and the woman who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. The choice was his to make. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed he might make the right one. Derek made his choice at 6:47 a.m. on Friday, day 15th, with a phone call that changed everything. Dad, can we meet? Just the two of us, not at your apartment. Brittany has people watching. Somewhere she won't think to look. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since Eleanor's funeral, when grief had stripped away all pretense and left only raw human need. We agreed to meet at Eleanor's gravesite, the one place Brittany had never shown any interest in visiting. I found him there an hour later, sitting on the stone bench I'd had installed next to Eleanor's headstone. He looked like a man who'd been wrestling with demons all night, and finally understood which side was winning. Dad, I keep thinking about Mom's funeral, he said without preamble. You held me up when I couldn't stand. You've been holding me up my whole life, and I repaid that by... His voice broke completely. By choosing the woman who was destroying you. I sat beside him on the bench, looking at Eleanor's name carved in granite. Your mother saw this coming. I know. God help me. I know. Derek pulled out a crumpled envelope. Eleanor's second letter, read so many times the paper was wearing thin. She tried to warn me about Brittany 3 years ago. Said she was worried about her influence, about how she talked about you when you weren't around. I thought Mom was just being protective. She was being protective. Of both of us. Derek turned to face me directly for the first time in months. Dad, I need to tell you something. Brittany and Theo. They've been planning this for over a year. The mortgage fraud, the eviction, even bringing in those men to threaten you. She's been feeding him information about your finances, your routines, everything. The betrayal was complete, but somehow hearing it confirmed felt like relief rather than pain. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to help you stop them. His voice carried a certainty I hadn't heard since he was young. I have documents, recorded conversations, text messages, everything Clayton needs to build a case that will put Theo away for years. And Brittany? Derek's face hardened with something that looked like his mother's determination. Brittany made her choice when she chose Theo over our family. Now it's my turn to choose. Saturday brought Derek to Clayton's surveillance office with a manila folder, thick with evidence. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, recorded phone conversations between Brittany and Theo discussing the old man problem, text messages coordinating the intimidation campaign against me. This is enough to bring down their entire operation, Clayton said, spreading the documents across his desk with the satisfaction of a detective who'd just been handed the missing piece of a complex puzzle. Derek, you realize what this means for your marriage? My marriage ended the day she called my father a useful tenant, Derek replied quietly. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Sunday evening brought Brittany's discovery of Derek's betrayal, delivered through a phone call that I could hear from across the room even though Derek was holding the receiver. You did what? Her voice was shrill with panic and rage. Derek, you have no idea what you've done. Theo has connections, people who don't forgive betrayal. You've put us both in danger. No, Brittany. You put us in danger when you started sleeping with a criminal. Derek's voice was steady calm, with the peace that comes from finally doing the right thing. It's over. We're over. I'm filing for divorce Monday morning. You chose your father over our future. You'll regret this, Derek. Both of you will regret this. The line went dead, but her threat hung in the air like poison gas. Monday morning found us at the Meridian Police Department, where Detective Sarah Martinez listened to Derek's testimony with the focused attention of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by financial predators. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, addressing Derek directly, "you understand that your testimony implicates your wife in multiple felonies: conspiracy, fraud, criminal intimidation." "I understand. And I understand that my father could have been seriously hurt because I was too weak to see what was happening." Derek looked at me, then back at Detective Martinez. "I won't let that happen again." Tuesday brought the divorce papers served to Brittany at the house that was no longer hers to occupy. Derek had moved out Monday night, taking only his clothes and his father's forgiveness. The rest, the furniture, the life they'd built on lies and manipulation, he left behind like artifacts from someone else's existence. "It's really over," Derek said as we sat in my apartment that evening, sharing takeout Chinese food and something that felt almost like the old days. "Theo, Brittany, all of it." "Not quite," I replied, thinking about Detective Martinez's promise to coordinate with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "But it will be." Derek nodded, then looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the boy who used to help me with weekend projects, back when trust was simple and family meant something solid. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I did. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know Mom would be proud of you. The way you fought back, the way you never gave up on family, even when family gave up on you." He paused, struggling with words. "Now it's my turn to hold you up." Outside spring was finally taking hold in Meridian, and for the first time in weeks, the future looked like something worth fighting for. The investigation expanded faster than any of us expected. By week 4, Detective Martinez had connected Derek's evidence to an FBI task force that had been tracking mortgage fraud across 3 states. What started as my family's personal nightmare had become part of something much larger, a criminal enterprise that had destroyed dozens of families across the Pacific Northwest. "Your son's testimony opened the floodgates," Detective Martinez explained during a briefing at the police station. "We've identified 17 other victims in Idaho alone, all elderly property owners, all targeted using the same pattern Theo used against your family." I thought about Harold Peterson, whose heart attack had followed his eviction by just 2 weeks, about Marge Peterson selling her wedding ring to pay for nursing home care, about families I'd never meet who'd suffered because people like Theo saw vulnerability as opportunity. "When do we move against him?" I asked. "Soon. Very soon." Week 5 brought the kind of justice that unfolds with the precise choreography of law enforcement professionals who've been planning every detail. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, federal agents raided Theo's downtown office, while Meridian police executed search warrants at 3 residential properties he'd acquired through fraudulent means. Clayton called me at 7:30 with news that made my hands shake with satisfaction. "They found everything, Amos. Financial records going back 5 years, correspondence with criminal associates, even recorded conversations where Theo brags about manipulating elderly victims. The FBI is calling it one of the most comprehensive fraud schemes they've seen in the region." By noon, Brittany was in custody. The woman who'd called me a useful tenant, who'd thrown my belongings into the street like garbage, was led away in handcuffs, while news cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. Derek watched the arrest from my apartment window, his face showing no emotion beyond quiet satisfaction. "She made her choice," he said simply. "Now she lives with the consequences." Week 6 brought the court hearing that would determine the legal ownership of my home, once and for all. The Ada County Courthouse was packed with other victims, their families and media representatives, covering what had become known as the Blackwood fraud case. Judge Patricia Williams reviewed the evidence with the methodical attention that complex property cases require. Harrison Caldwell presented our documentation with the confidence of someone who'd built an airtight legal argument, while the court-appointed attorney representing Derek and Brittany's interests struggled to find any legitimate challenge to my ownership claim. "The evidence is clear and unambiguous," Judge Williams announced after 2 hours of testimony. "The property in question was purchased, financed, and maintained by Amos Whitfield. The deed lists him as sole owner. The mortgage was in his name exclusively, and all payments were made from his accounts. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Whitfield, your property rights are fully restored." The gavel's sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder, and for the first time in 2 months, I felt like I could breathe completely. That afternoon brought Theo's arrest. Federal marshals found him at the Boise airport, attempting to board a flight to Mexico with $200,000 in cash and a passport that belonged to someone else. The man who'd threatened to make me disappear permanently was led away in chains, his expensive suit rumpled, and his practiced smile replaced by the hollow stare of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed in a single morning. Mr. Theodore Blackwood, you're under arrest for mortgage fraud, conspiracy, criminal intimidation, money laundering, and identity theft. Detective Martinez announced as cameras captured every moment. You have the right to remain silent. The list of charges took 3 minutes to read completely. That evening, Derek and I stood in the driveway of my house, our house, watching the last of Brittany's belongings being loaded into a moving truck by court-appointed movers. The locks had been changed back to the originals, the keys were in my pocket where they belonged, and the legal nightmare that had started with my belongings scattered on the street was finally over. It's really ours again, Derek said, his voice carrying wonder at the simple concept of home. It was always ours, I replied. Some people just forgot that for a while. Randy Hayes appeared from across the street, carrying a six-pack of beer, and wearing the relieved expression of a man whose neighborhood had been restored to sanity. Amos Derrick, he called, approaching with the careful steps of someone who knew he had amends to make. I thought we might sit on the porch like we used to. I've got some apologizing to do, and some stories to tell about what I saw these past few weeks. As the sun set over Meridian, painting the suburban sky in shades of gold and orange, I realized that justice wasn't just about court victories and criminal arrests. It was about the restoration of simple things. Family dinners, neighborhood friendships, the right to sit on your own porch without fear. Eleanor had protected us, even from beyond the grave, but we'd had to fight for what she'd given us. Now, finally, the fight was over. Week 7 began with Derek and me standing in the doorway of our restored home, keys in my hand, and 44 years of fatherhood hanging in the balance between us. The house felt different, not just because the locks had been changed back, or because Brittany's belongings were gone, but because the people entering it had been fundamentally changed by everything we'd endured. It feels bigger somehow, Derek said, looking around the living room where we'd shared countless dinners, holiday celebrations, and quiet evenings before everything went wrong. Maybe because there's room for honesty now, I replied, hanging my jacket on the hook by the door, a simple gesture that felt like reclaiming territory. That weekend we drove to Pyatt Lake for the first time since this nightmare began. The same winding road, the same peaceful water, but everything was different now. Derek carried the tackle box I'd taught him to organize as a child, and for the first time in years we fished in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional comment about weather or technique. Dad, I want to learn to be the son Mom raised me to be, he said as we watched our lines drift in the afternoon current. I know it might take time, and I know I have a lot to prove, but I want to try. Your mother always said that people deserve second chances if they're willing to do the work, I replied, thinking about Eleanor's endless capacity for forgiveness and growth. The question is, are you willing to do the work every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it takes? Victoria joined us for dinner that Tuesday, bringing homemade lasagna and the kind of easy conversation that made the house feel like home again. What had started as a professional relationship built on Eleanor's foresight had developed into something warmer, more personal. Not quite romance yet, but the possibility of it hovering like spring in the air. Aunt Eleanor would be so proud of both of you, she said, watching Derek help with dishes without being asked. She always believed that people could change if they had the right motivation and support. She gave us both the tools we needed, I replied, even when she wasn't here to see us use them. Thursday brought a discovery that stopped us all in our tracks. While cleaning out the basement safe, the same one where Derek had found Eleanor's second letter, I discovered a small video camera and a note in Eleanor's handwriting, for after the storm passes, watch together. The three of us gathered in the living room as Derek connected the camera to the television. Eleanor's face appeared on screen, thinner than I remembered from her final months, but still carrying the warmth and intelligence that had made me fall in love with her 43 years earlier. My dearest Amos and Derek, she began, her voice clear, despite the cancer treatments that had weakened her body. If you're watching this, my plans worked perfectly. The storm has passed, justice has been served, and you're both safe. Derek's hand found mine as we listened to his mother's final message. 15 minutes of love, wisdom, and practical advice about rebuilding their relationship, managing the property, and moving forward with hope instead of bitterness. Amos, you've always been stronger than you knew. Derek, you've always been better than you believed. Together, you can build something beautiful from what was broken. Her smile was radiant with the certainty of someone who'd planned for every contingency. Now go live the life you deserve, both of you. The video ended with Eleanor blowing a kiss to the camera, and for several minutes, none of us could speak. Week 8 brought an unexpected celebration. Randy Hayes organized a neighborhood barbecue, his way of apologizing for his silence during the crisis and celebrating the restoration of community trust. Families I'd known for years gathered in my backyard sharing food and stories and the kind of easy friendship that had been missing during the months of tension and uncertainty. You showed us all what it means to fight for what's right, Randy said, raising a beer in my direction as the sun set over Meridian. And Derek, you showed us it's never too late to do the right thing. That evening after the neighbors had gone home and the dishes were washed, Derek and I sat on the front porch, the same spot where Brittany had delivered her useful tenant speech 8 weeks earlier. The contrast was so complete, it felt like a different lifetime. Dad, what happens now? Derek asked, settling into the chair that had always been his during the good years. Now we live, I said simply. We take care of the house, we take care of each other, and we honor your mother's memory by being the family she always believed we could be. Victoria's car pulled into the driveway, and she joined us on the porch with a bottle of wine and the comfortable presence of someone who belonged in our restored world. To Eleanor, she said, raising her glass as the first stars appeared in the Idaho sky. To Eleanor, Derek and I replied in unison, and to second chances I added silently. To the love that transcends death, to the family that endures beyond betrayal, and to the hope that makes healing possible. The storm had passed, the healing had begun, and for the first time in months, the future looked like something worth building together. 6 months after the storm passed, I stood in my renovated kitchen, watching Derek install new cabinet hardware with the careful precision he'd learned from me 30 years earlier. The house bore no resemblance to the place where Brittany had called me a useful tenant. Fresh paint, updated fixtures, and the kind of comfortable warmth that comes from people who actually want to be there. Hand me that level, would you, Dad? Derek asked, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to ask for help. Every morning he made coffee for both of us. Every evening he asked about my day and meant it. Every weekend we worked on some project together, not because the house needed it, but because we discovered that working side by side was how we talked best. 8 months brought Victoria's integration into our daily lives with the natural progression of people who'd been through something significant together. When we announced our relationship to the community, Randy Hayes threw an impromptu block party that drew neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Eleanor would be so proud, Victoria said as we watched Derek teaching the neighbor kids how to properly bait a fishing hook. Her plan wasn't just about saving you, Amos. It was about saving your whole family. The criminal justice system moved with its own deliberate pace, but justice eventually came. 10 months after his arrest, Theodore Blackwood was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for mortgage fraud, conspiracy, and criminal intimidation. Brittany received 3 years of supervised probation and was ordered to pay restitution to his victims, a debt that would follow her for the rest of her life. 12 years, Derek said when we heard the news. That's longer than I expected. It's not about the time, I replied. It's about the message it sends to other people who think they can prey on families. 1 year after my belongings were scattered on the street, like garbage, the neighborhood threw what Randy dubbed the Whitfield Turnaround celebration. Families gathered in our backyard sharing food and stories, and the kind of genuine community connection that had been missing during the months of crisis and uncertainty. You showed us all what it means to fight for what's right, said Margaret Chen, whose elderly father had been one of Theo's other victims. And Derek, you showed us it's never too late to choose family over everything else. Derek's transformation wasn't just visible in grand gestures, it lived in the small moments. The way he automatically took out the garbage without being asked. The way he listened when I told stories about his mother. The way he'd started volunteering with Clayton to help other families navigate elder fraud cases. Dad, every day I try to be worthy of the second chance you gave me, he said as we sat on the front porch that evening watching our neighbors clean up from the celebration. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure it never happens again. Victoria joined us as the sun set over Meridian, carrying 3 glasses of the good whiskey Eleanor had been saving for special occasions. The bottle had survived Brittany's purge, hidden behind her mother's recipe books, where sentiment lived. To Eleanor, Victoria said, raising her glass. To Eleanor, Derek and I replied. But as I looked around at our restored home, our rebuilt relationships, and our reimagined future, I realized Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't the legal protection or the financial security she'd provided. It was the lesson she'd taught us about the difference between love and possession, between family and ownership, between justice and revenge. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and loving better. I said, thinking about Harold Peterson's heart attack, about Marge, selling her wedding ring, about all the families Theo had destroyed before we stopped him. Mom always said that, Derek replied softly. She said revenge was just pain looking for somewhere to go, but justice was love looking for a way to protect people. Clayton arrived as the stars appeared, carrying his tackle box, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose work was finally done. Thought we might do some night fishing, he said. The lake's been calling. As we loaded our gear into my pickup truck, the same vehicle that had carried me home to scattered belongings and broken trust, I marveled at how completely life could change when people chose to do the work of healing rather than the easier work of holding grudges. The road to Payette Lake stretched ahead of us in the darkness, familiar and welcoming. Behind us, the house glowed with warm light windows, revealing a family that had been broken and rebuilt stronger than before. Eleanor had been right about everything. The storm had passed. Justice had been served, and we were finally living the life we deserved. Not because we were perfect, but because we'd learned that love properly protected and wisely shared could survive anything, even death, even betrayal, even the kind of pain that scatters your life on the street and forces you to choose between bitterness and hope. We chose hope, and hope, as Eleanor had always known, was where new beginnings lived. Sometimes life teaches us that the deepest betrayal stories come from those closest to our hearts, but they also reveal our greatest strength. Amos's journey reminds us that when family turns against us, God provides other paths to justice and healing. The Lord works through unexpected allies like Eleanor's foresight, Victoria's family connection, and Clayton's investigation skills, showing us that divine protection often comes in forms we never anticipated. These grandpa stories of resilience teach us that age brings wisdom, not weakness. When Derek chose greed over gratitude, God was already preparing Amos's vindication through legal documents and loving preparation that transcended death itself. Eleanor's faith-driven planning proved that the Almighty honors those who protect their families even from beyond the grave. The most powerful betrayal stories often become the most beautiful redemption tales. Derek's transformation shows us that it's never too late to choose righteousness over convenience. Grandpa stories like this remind us that respect must be earned daily, and that true family bonds survive even the deepest wounds when built on genuine love and mutual honor. God's timing is perfect. Amos's suffering led to Theo's exposure, protecting countless other families from similar fraud. These grandpa stories of justice prove that the Lord uses our trials to serve his greater purpose, turning our pain into protection for others. What betrayal stories from your own family have taught you about resilience and forgiveness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might encourage someone facing their own family crisis. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that justice and healing are always possible, no matter how dark things seem. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss stories of triumph over adversity.